Okay. Thank you all for coming. Especially thank you to Linda for inviting me. First thing I want to do is share my screen and share a song with you.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, a thousand mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our life shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread, small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we bring the braver days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. Our life shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Beautiful.
I just wanted you to know that while I was working on this book, this song was going through my head all the time. So I wanted to just give it to you so it can run through your head while I'm talking. I started, of course, I started this project during the last week of July 2005 at Legacies, the 26th International Calligraphy Conference in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. The class was titled Defining Meaning and was taught by Brody Neuenschwander. We were each told to bring 3 texts of between 50 to 150 words. The aim was to produce a multifaceted interpretation of chosen texts using calligraphy, found letters, mixed media, journal work, drawing, etc. The final form would be a book in which textural reverberations have priority over any literal reading of the text. I finished this book, the first of an edition of 5, 8 months later, in a 5th-floor apartment in Moscow, Russia. I'm pretty sure that what I produced is not what Brody had in mind. But when we met again in Chicago in 2008 at another conference, he invited me to share it with his class. The first text that I chose was a speech titled "This World is Off Its Rocker When It Comes to Women" by the Canadian politician and diplomat Stephen Lewis, delivered in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania's Summit on Global Health Issues in Women's Health on April 26, 2005. At that time, he was Kofi Annan's UN Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa. The second text that I chose was a poem by the Canadian poet Robyn Sarah called Fugue. I had a third text, which I cannot remember at all, because while I was working on this, Bread and Roses kept running through my head, and so finally I gave it a place in the book. I was inspired by this photo in a Maclean's magazine of Sudanese women lining up for food. My initial idea was to have a row of women like this going all across the bottom of my book. But one day my husband looked at what I was doing and said, "You can't have only one kind of woman in your book. You need to have representations of all women." So I made stamps. And 3 stamp pads out of sponges with a layer of silk on top. They were 3 different values of walnut ink, and I stamped the figures along the bottom of my book. First, I made a 3-section book sewed onto tape. I tried a few things with the women. We were in Russia, after all, so I tried adding halos to make them look like saints, but that just looked like scuba diving gear, so I ditched that idea. I tried adding faces, but that made the figures look too specific, so I ditched that idea. I like this idea of letting the children play with a maypole attached to a stick in the spine, but I threw that idea out too. I finally decided to make an accordion folded book and made a mock-up that is about 1/4 of the size of the final. I decided that I wanted the book to have a spine, so I devised this magnet system so that the spine could be open to display the book. You can see the magnet, or one magnet, in the back of this photo. The book is 44 feet long when it is totally spread out. There are 20 double-page spreads and 2 half pages pasted to the covers. Each double-page spread is the width of a piece of Arches text wove and 1/4 of the height, so I could get 4 pages out of 1 sheet of Arches text wove. The background is paste made of walnut ink and an acrylic yellow. I don't remember exactly which color. Before I started pasting, I had planned all the pages, so I numbered them and pasted them in sequence to help hide the joins when they were finally glued together. They are joined at the valley fold. I worked on the pages individually until I finished everything except pasting on the covers and writing Bread and Roses. After I glued the pages together, I wrote Bread and Roses using a cola pen that Brody had given me in the class at Legacies. And I wrote Bread and Roses starting from the women at the end of the book, which was the front of the line, and just wrote. I decided that the children were playing, so they wouldn't be singing. And you will see one other page where the women aren't singing. Here is my first clamshell box, which I made with the directions from a book that I had. Those of you who make clamshell boxes will notice immediately the problem with it. It closes very snugly and can only be opened easily with ribbons. The cloth that I used for the book covers and box is Belarusian linen, which I dyed with walnut ink. We had a lovely cleaning lady in Moscow who could not speak English, but loved to give us gifts. So every week when she came, she brought a new tchotchke. Finally, I told her she had to stop because the apartment had nowhere to put them. Then one day she arrived with this bolt of raw linen, which I accepted gratefully. The inside of each box is lined with a different Japanese chiogami, and the women on the covers of the books are dressed to match the linings. The first double page spread is, the first double page spread is part of a Stephen Lewis speech. The world is off its rocker when it comes to women. It starts on the second page, so it's a bit hard to read. Also, it's upside down. On the left side of this double page spread, I built a cairn and added the names of 3 women in my life who had died, my mother and 2 friends. On the right side of the text are placed the titles of the texts are placed in the writing that I used for them in the book. I had tried to write the Stephen Lewis speech by hand, but I wanted it to look solid and architectural, so my lettering always had too much life. And I settled on ITC Willow for the text. I wanted the title page of each book to be calm, but I must have made some mistake. And this one opens with a fairly terrifying cloud. I love that the women just keep marching on, ignoring it. The strange columns in the background are residual from Brody's class. Any of you who were taking classes from him at that time will recognize them. I made light washes of yellow, blue, brown, and pink on 4 sheets of Arches text wove and printed the Stephen Lewis texts 5 times with my Epson 2000 printer. Then I cut them up and divided them so that the pieces would not be monotone in color. One of my rules that I have for myself is that no word should fall on a fold. In order to make the writing on the left side of the page fall where I wanted it to, I wrote it backwards, starting from the fold. You will notice that throughout the book. Sometimes the spacing is a little off, but I can live with that. Sometimes the images reflect the poem, and sometimes they reflect Stephen Lewis's speech. On this page, they reflect the speech, which I will read to you. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Zambia visiting a district well outside of Lusaka. We were taken to a rural village to see an income-generating project run by a group of women living with AIDS. They were gathered under a large banner proclaiming their identity, some 15 or 20 women, all living with the virus, all looking after orphans. They were standing proudly beside the income-generating project, a bountiful cabbage patch. After they had spoken volubly and eloquently about their needs and the needs of their children, as always, hunger led the litany. I asked about the cabbages. I assumed it supplemented their diet. Yes, they chorused. And you sell the surplus at market, an energetic nodding of heads. And I take it you make a profit. Yes, again. And what do you do with the profit? At this time, there was an almost quizzical response, as if to say, what kind of ridiculous question is that? Surely you knew the answer before you asked. We buy coffins, of course. We never have enough coffins. It's at moments like that when I feel that the world has gone mad. That's no existential spasm on my part. I simply don't know how otherwise to characterize what we're doing to half of humankind. They do not get very far in a day. You can still see them from high office windows. Women are on their way to the new country. They are taking it all with them, rugs, pianos, children, or they are leaving it all behind them, cats, plants, children. They do not get very far in a day. Some women travel alone to the new country, some with a child or children. And here again, Stephen Lewis's speech comes in. I want to remind you that as recently as March, there was tabled internationally the Commission on Africa, chaired by Prime Minister Tony Blair. Indeed, established by Tony Blair. It has received nothing but accolades, particularly for the analysis and recommendations on official development assistance, on trade, and on debt. The tributes are deserved. The document goes further down progressive road than any other contemporary international compilation, with one exception. I want it to be known, because it is not known, that the one aspect of this prestigious report which fails lamentably is the way in which it deals with women. There's the occasional obligatory paragraph which signals that the Commission recognizes that there are two sexes in the world. But by and large, given that women are absolutely central to the very integrity and survival of the African continent, they are dealt with as they are always dealt with in these auspicious studies, at the margins, in passing, pro forma. And it's not just HIV/AIDS, it's everything from trade to agriculture to conflict to peace building. Maybe we should have guessed what was coming when there were only 3 women appointed out of 17 commissioners. They had the whole world to choose from, and they could find only 3 women. It doesn't even begin to meet the Beijing minimum target of 30%. We're not just climbing uphill. We might as well be facing the Himalayas. Some go in pairs or groups, or in pairs with a child or children. Some in a group with cats, plants, children. They do not get very far in a day. They must stop to bake bread on the road to the new country and to share bread with other women. Children outgrow their clothes and shed them for smaller children. The women too shed clothes, put on each other's. I wanted to put one woman in a burqa somewhere in each book, but when it came to actually doing it, I couldn't. So every book has one blue burqa stuck in the clothes that have been thrown off. Cats, plants, children, and at full moon, no one remembers the way to the new country, where there will be room for everyone. And it will be summer, and children will shed their clothes, and the loaves will rise without yeast. And the women will have come so far that no one can see them, even from high office windows. Here I included the text from the website Bread and Roses. The Bread and Roses strike begins in mass moments, and I'll give you the link to that if you want to look it up later. James Oppenheim wrote the poem Bread and Roses after being inspired by the words of an early suffragette, Helen Todd, who used the phrase bread for all and roses too in a speech in 1910. The poem was set to music by Caroline Colsatt. It was sung during the textile workers' strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which lasted from January 12th to March 12th, 1912. It became known as the Bread and Roses strike. A new state law in Massachusetts had reduced the maximum work week from 56 to 54 hours. Factory owners responded by speeding up production and cutting workers' pay. On January 12, 1912, workers in the American Woolen Company mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts, opened their pay envelopes to find their wages had been cut. They took to the streets in protest, beginning a historic, history-making confrontation between labor and capital. The Bread and Roses strike, as it became known, broke new ground in several ways. More than half of the workers in the Lawrence textile mills were women and children, and women played a major role in the strike. Most of the workers were unskilled newcomers from the Middle East and Southern and Eastern Europe. They spoke more than a dozen different languages and practiced a variety of religions and ethnic customs. What bound them together was the need to improve their living and working conditions. They were not allowed to stand while they were striking, and they sang. They would have sung the melody written by Caroline Colsatt. In 1974, Joan Baez's younger sister, Mimi Farina, composed another melody for these words. It has been recorded by many singers, but the Judy Collins version was the one that was stuck in my head. The song and slogan are now important parts of the labor movement and women's movement worldwide. And again, my husband looked at this and said, "You can't expect people to read Stephen Lewis's speech bend over." So I included it in its entirety at the end of the book. And Robyn Sarah asked that her poem be included in the format in which she had written it. Then in my colophon, I tried to thank everybody who had helped me for their inspiration, all the women who struggle daily to survive and those who continue to help them. Stephen Lewis for his wonderful speech and permission to include it in this book. Robyn Sarah for writing the poem Fugue. James Oppenheim for writing Bread and Roses. The Massachusetts Foundations for the Humanities website for their concise history of the Bread and Roses strike. Brody Neuenschwander for nurturing my idea. Dorothea and Gordon Anderson for carrying the Davy board that I needed for my book and boxes to Russia when they came to visit me. Elvira Meleshkina for the linen used to cover the books. My husband, Neil McKee, for both physical and moral support throughout this project, in spite of the fact that I did not get very far in a day. My son, Derek, for keeping me supplied with scraps of Japanese printed paper. My daughter, Ruth, for her insightful critique. And Georgiana Gita for the surgical tweezers, without which I could not have done this. And Anansi Press for copyright permission for Fugue. After I'd finished making all the books, I needed Stephen Lewis and Robyn Sarah to sign them for me to make them complete. So while on home leave visiting Ottawa, I managed to meet Stephen Lewis at the Ottawa airport as he was about to catch a flight and had him sign all of the books. Then I drove to Robyn Sarah's house in Montreal and had her sign them all before I gave her a copy. And I sent a copy to Stephen Lewis by mail. You may want to know how one copy ended up in the National Museum of Women and the Arts. How does one do that? I asked myself also. For me, it was purely being in the right place at the right time. I went to a book fair in Tacoma Park outside of Washington, D.C., hoping to meet Vamp and Tramp booksellers, and I did. I had just sat down to show my book to Vicki Stewart when an older woman came over and said, "Who are you? And what is that?" Vicki immediately got up and left, and I met Christina Wasserman, the curator of the book collection at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Then I was encouraged to make spin-offs of the book. I thought, oh yes, I will make posters for the Stephen Lewis Foundation. It has many groups of grandmothers who support grandmothers in Africa who are living with AIDS, and this would be a perfect project for them to raise money with. But it turned out that the granny groups are pretty independent and had their own ideas of how to raise money, and I am a very poor salesperson. We did have a few poster parties with people getting together to dress the women in my posters. But then my daughter said, "Oh, Mom, dressing the women in those posters takes too long. My friends don't have a whole day to give to making posters. Do cards and bookmarks." So I made cards and bookmarks. And my daughter said, "But the way you dress people is so restricted. I want to dress them differently." So she did. And I took some of the figures and made them into men. And my friend Jean and her sister sat down a couple of times and dressed the women in very fun ways. but I still have cards and bookmarks left over. When we left Maryland, I had about 1,700 of these, of the posters left sitting under my bed. So I recycled about 1,500 of them. But I still have cards and I have a few posters for sale, which I will be selling at the Anything Goes show in April, if anybody is interested in buying these. Oh, and I have directions for addressing people. And here are the websites that will probably be of interest to you. I'll put them on in the chat after. And here are some cards that I had hoped to have finished before this afternoon, but I also do not get very far in a day. Thank you.
Wow, Elizabeth. I find those books amazing. I think Amy is going to help us with some questions from chat if they
I
weren't.
am ready to do that.
Okay.
I noticed in your presentation that you had made one of the book that you showed us today was one of 5, but I did have a question from Ruth Ann as to whether or not there is a published version of this book.
There is not. I had hoped that I could do that, and it does reduce really nicely. I had a few mock versions of it, but there is no published version. If anybody wanted to send me to a publisher who was interested in that, I am very interested in having a published version made.
Okay. Next question is, Nyala Cohen asked if there is a reason for the joins being at the valley fold versus the mountain fold.
I thought they would be less conspicuous, I think.
Okay. And then Sally Blakemore has asked a lot of questions, so we'll kind of run through them. How many times normally from start to finish do you create your comps and work in your process with those comps?
I don't have any normal way of working. Sorry, this was.
I don't either, that's okay.
I have some books that I've started 3 or 4 times and tossed out the beginning ones and sort of working my way toward something else.
I think her next question is similar to that. We're talking about comps, and she asked if you have to see what you're thinking before you're able to add to it or to change it. So I think that's the same kind of concept. And Sally, jump in here if you'd like, as comps, kind of working through what you're thinking to get it on the paper.
Was that a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll try again.
Yeah.
Do you have to see what you are thinking in order to add it to what you're doing or to change it?
No, sometimes when I'm thinking about something, I'll do my backgrounds with my left hand so that so I can't think about it very much. They just show up and then I find things in them.
That's interesting. Are you ambidextrous that you do something
No.
with you? Oh, okay.
No, my left hand is my But I find, and I don't know if anybody else finds this, but whatever my left hand does, I mother. But my right hand is trained, and so I expect more from it. But my left hand I forgive much more than I forgive my right hand. And it's an emotional feeling that I have towards what my left hand does.
That's really interesting. The next question is, did you tint the paper before you printed on it?
Yes, the Stephen Lewis speech. Yes, I tinted that first, and then I printed on it.
And follow on to that is, how did you handle the inks before the tint, and did you fix them? Like using a fixative, I gather.
Oh, no, it's not fixed, because the poem Fugue and also the Bread and Roses are written with walnut ink, and that's water soluble. So yeah, there was one page where I have the older version on my website. I have the older version there, but I was showing it to somebody when I was having lunch outside one day, and a drop of rain fell on one word. And so I had to fix that. And I just built the boxes up a little higher and covered it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all the questions, except for I will tell you that you have a lot of amazing and wonderful compliments on your book.
Thank you very much.
We will send you those too.
Right. And I just want to do one other screen share, and I'll put this out. I think I got it there. Yes. I developed a website for immediate release, but then the company killed it. But yesterday I was just looking at something and found this old blog that I made, and it has all the directions for dressing these women and how to do it, all my things for posters. So I will share that with you for anybody who's a little bit interested.
Thank
And
you.
add one more thing before we leave. One person here has given you a suggestion for where you could send a proposal to have your book published. So when you get the chat, look for that. It's
Okay.
in there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We will find that for you too, Elizabeth. Thank you so very much. This has been fabulous. I really enjoyed it, and I love the book. I have one more question, which is, in total, how many books did you make by
I
hand?
made 5.
5. That's what I thought.
Mhm.
That's a lot of making. That's I can see where that
Listen to
would.
War and Peace twice.
Thank you. That's a good measure.